It was Thursday, and I had one more day of work before I was free, so my first thought of the day was about the weekend. Tomorrow, I plan to spend the entire day with my two favorite girls, my 3-year-old daughter Sophie and my elderly wife Karen. I'm going to perform some odd things around my mom's house with my daughter, and then spend the rest of the day chasing Sophie. I had Sophie around the backyard because my wife, Karen, was out of town for work and wouldn't return until late Saturday. Entirely to myself, I spent a great half day at work putting the new course catalog on after dropping Sophie off at nursery. Our company's website. I completed much earlier than anticipated, so I could pick up Sophie and go when I was done. I arrived home at 9 o'clock to discover it was vacant, so I had time to wait until 12 o'clock to pick up Sophie. As I finished my peanut butter and banana sandwich with my left hand, I toss a few items in the van and grab a sandwich. Began stacking clothes and other necessities for the week. I tossed my own clothes and goods we would need for. I also threw a bottle of shampoo upon the bed's pile over the week, but it rolled off and into the floor. I used my best telekinetic skills to try to bring it back up on Karen's side, but it didn't work, so I had to walk over and pick it up. I saw it right away, so I crouched down and groped beneath it, assuming it had rolled somewhere. The bed wasn't there, so I went digging beneath the nightstand and returned with a shampoo bottle and a book. I pondered, does Karen know this is under here? As I examined the small book, which didn't appear to be one of hers. I thought it was a journal, but it was actually a book or perhaps a reference for her work. For a long time, I lay on the bed contemplating whether or not to open it and read what was inside. On the one hand, I didn't want, if this was Karen's personal diary, to violate her privacy, yet if there was something in it that I needed to know, thus I had to read it. If I wanted to know, I should read it even if it might not be important. Perhaps so, but as soon as I turned to the first page, I recognized Karen's handwriting, so there was no question about. I started reading 9 months ago, and I recently came across a journal entry dated January 15th, 2023, which states that the writer has chosen to maintain a journal because they believe it will benefit them. The writer is unsure of what the future holds, but they believe it will be terrible since they believe that everything they have done and will do will harm Dan and Sophie, but they are unable to change this. There doesn't seem to be a way out, therefore they can't discover one. I think he might be in an extremely horrible scenario. If something goes wrong, I'm not sure if it will, but I do know that keeping track of everything will assist. That nothing will change, and I just hope that something positive will out of it. This whole affair began a little more than a 1 month ago. I was summoned to my boss's office by Stephen Hart, one of Titan's executive managers. Corp and is a strong, intimidating man that everyone knows is not to be messed with. Was speaking with Mike Daniels, one of the internal auditors, and they informed me that several of the accounts I was in charge of were. I was short $750 each time they showed me the documentation, and it appeared that I had taken out $700 in cash at the time of the deposit. They stated that they wanted to give me an opportunity to clarify. Before they went to the corporate office and the police, I had no idea what had happened to the money. I had never taken anything, but they had. A thorough paper trail. The documentation revealed that $750 in cash was absent each time I made a deposit. I tried to explain that I didn't know about the missing funds and that I hadn't done anything illegal, but they refused to listen, so I broke down and started crying in front of them. They claimed that because I had no explanation, they were forced to turn the situation over to the authorities, so I had to return to my desk. At the end of the day, I returned to my desk and sobbed, Mr. Hart, after being fired and forced to vacate the property. After much conversation, a lot of begging, and a lot of tears on my part, he called and said he wanted to talk about my predicament. He claimed to believe my narrative and feel terrible for me, but I had to have faith that he would be able to make things right. He made a promise to me that he wouldn't give the case to the police and that he would pay the missing money if I were hired as his personal assistant, as the position had been unfilled since his last assistant failed to show up. I would have a new job working only for him if I showed up for work one day and never heard from her again. Be managing any funds. He assured me that I could rely on him to rescue me from my predicament and that I would eventually be able to return the money I owed him. It seemed too good to be true, but I was glad to accept his offer in addition to moving from the move from contract specialist to personal assistant to an executive manager came with more responsibilities and a higher compensation. When I asked him how I was going to repay the money I owed, he told to trust him, saying he would clarify everything. He promised to call the auditor once I made my payment and inform him that he had located the missing funds in another account that he had neglected to bring up before he claimed that I was only following instructions in order to get out of trouble with them. Dan was overjoyed when I told him about my promotion that evening, but I didn't bring up any unaccounted for funds. I was unable to express my feelings about it because Dan had this issue. Always urged me to resolve my own issues before seeking his assistance. I didn't want to let him down, and I'll never. I can't remember how he looked at me when he told me that I was advancing in the corporate world when we were sipping martinis at Rosario's. He was really proud of me when I moved into my new office the following day. It was a tiny outer space, and the world and my future looked bright. There was a little lounge at the rear of the office with a door, a complete bathroom, a clothing closet, and a tiny couch. At the rear of Mr. Hart's office, there was an additional door leading to a lounge. This lounge was similarly set out, but it had as word spread across the workplace that I was Mr. Hart's new administrative assistant, there was a bigger couch and a tiny, fully furnished bar. My female coworkers gave me a lot of stares. The other employees were amiable, and the guys I didn't know were. I didn't understand what it meant when he smiled at me, and it felt a little odd. Later that day, Mr. Hart called me into his office, and I sat behind his desk while he explained my responsibilities. He stated that I had the typical assistant responsibilities, such as scheduling appointments, welcoming clients, typing, filing, and brewing coffee. He said that I was obliged to go with him to meetings and events held by the corporation outside of usual business hours. He also informed me that I would be accompanying him to out-of-town meetings and that I should dress appropriately because he claimed that I was his personal representative and a company representative, so I had to look the role I always believed I wore. Pleasant. But he told me that I should dress more appropriately for his assistant because I was wearing too much conservative clothing. He instructed me to wear shorter skirts and to either go barefoot or wear stockings instead of pantyhose. I had to have my hair loose and falling over my shoulders and was not permitted to wear a bra. I may wear panties if I wanted them, but they were optional. I was shocked and unable to respond, so he raised his hand to halt. Before I could say anything, he told me to change my attire and to dress to flaunt my appearance. He reminded me of the missing money because he wanted other managers and clients to see how gorgeous I was, and threatened to end our arrangement if I didn't start dressing the way he requested the following day. Refused to cooperate, claiming that he knew what he was doing and that he would never do anything to offend or humiliate me. I was in a conference and was unable to think clearly. I was at a loss for words, so all I could do was sit quietly and look down at my hands. He handed me an envelope and instructed me to take the afternoon off to go and buy some new clothes. Would flaunt my physique, he added, adding that I could keep my new clothes if I was concerned about what my husband might think. I had to change into it first thing in the morning at work before I could leave for home, but I had to dress the way he requested while I was at work or with him at business events, so I took the envelope and returned to my office and gave it some thinking. He told me he wouldn't do anything to make me feel bad or ashamed, however, I was concerned about what my coworkers would think if they saw me because I might attract a lot of attention. The more I considered it, the more I realized that I was trapped dressing differently and that I didn't have the money to buy new clothes. The more I believed that it could be enjoyable to attract attention and make others believe that I was attractive, the more I would draw the line and wear knickers, even if I'm a little plain and perhaps deserve to feel and look sexy for a change. I wore my typical business suit to work that afternoon, but I changed into one of my new purchases in the outfit in the restroom consisted of a basic sheer white shirt and a very short black skirt. I mean, so short that the hem reached my thighs. I felt a little weird without a bra, so I didn't wear stockings because the tops would have seen through a short skirt. After that, I simply remained in my office and worked until midday when Mr. Hart summoned me to his office and instructed me to. Entering his office, after passing via our connecting lounges, I noticed that he was leaning against the. As I walked up in front of his desk, he informed me that I looked lovely, but that he needed to make sure I followed. When he inquired about my wardrobe, and I replied that I wasn't wearing a bra, he said he needed to check and informed me. I stood there staring at him for a few seconds as he unbuttoned my blouse. His face altered, and he gave me a harsh look. I had to show him the look on his face as he spoke in a strong and menacing manner. I unzipped my blouse and stood there with it closed so he could see that I was embarrassed, or else was not wearing a bra. He said that was good, and then he instructed me to pull my pantyhose off to make sure I wasn't wearing them. He glared at me once again as I hesitated to lift my skirt and reveal him. So I tentatively reached out and tugged. I thought that when I lifted my skirt and showed him everything he said was lovely, he turned and sat down behind his desk. When he sat down, I lowered my skirt and he reprimanded me, saying that I hadn't instructed him to do so. I'd better get dressed. He added that I should only follow his instructions, so I lowered my skirt once more and stood there staring at. He simply sat on the floor and grinned at me. After a few minutes, he instructed me to change and return to. Every day, for the remainder of the week, the wardrobe examination took place in this manner. On Monday morning, he contacted me and we went through the clothing inspection once more, but this time he instructed me to remove my blouse and give it to him. Appeared angry as I stood there staring at him, and I began to cry. He simply growled, so I removed my top and held it out. For him, I covered myself with one hand and said, "Now lower your han." DS. I did as he asked, lowering my skirt, and he responded, "I wanted to escape and hide, but I couldn't since I was dressed in a way that made it challenging to move swiftly." I grabbed the skirt and handed it to him, lowering the zip and letting the skirt drop. Drop to the ground, I leaned over to retrieve it, gave it to him, and simply stood there, tears streaming down my face. He returned and sat down after saying something that was even more gorgeous than I had anticipated, leaving me feeling ashamed and hot all over. I placed my clothes on the desk. He then sat for a while, staring at me while I stood there nude, before grinning. I started to put my clothes back on after he told me I could take them and head back to my office, but he stopped me, instructed me to leave as I was and change in the lounge. So I gathered my belongings and hurried out on Tuesday and Wednesday. Though I cried less every day, it was similar to Monday. By Friday, I was nude for his inspection, and on Monday of the following week, I was nude once more. He instructed me to take a seat in the chair across from him, explaining that one of my responsibilities as his assistant was to ensure his happiness at all times. I told him I didn't understand, and he clarified. He then gave me a thorough explanation of what he wanted me to do and advised me to stop what I was doing and come see him. I was instructed not to inform anyone about what I was doing whenever he called, especially my husband. He would then make sure that Dan knew that Sophie was upset, even though he didn't explain how I felt, and our agreement regarding the missing money would be off. I adore my spouse and would never do anything to damage him, he added, adding that I couldn't do anything like that he didn't give a damn about my domestic issues, but that he would fire me if I didn't follow his instructions. Dan and Sophie would cover my expenses. He gave me until the next morning to decide, so I went home and considered my options. I sobbed a lot and thought about telling Dan about my issue, but I decided I could manage it alone. He took care of Sophie because I wasn't feeling well and left me alone because I didn't see any other choice. The following day, when we went, I grudgingly complied with his request during the wardrobe inspection before I left the office, but I retreated when he stated he wanted a tiny taste. He was so terrified that he simply got up and snarled at me, saying that if I ever hesitated or asked him whether I didn't do as he said, and I'd pay for it. He threatened to fire me right away. He circled me, glancing up and down before he halted and returned to his desk, instructing me to make ready and resume work. The day he summoned me into his. He was on the phone in the office when he gestured for me to get on his lap. When I complied, he began massaging my back and shoulders. He advised me to be cheerful, enjoy myself, and pretend when he gave me instructions. After letting go of my hair, he urged me to get dressed and return to my work, saying that I had to punish myself. When I went home that night, I just stared at Dan while he prepared dinner and pondered I just cheated on him, and I despised what I'd done. I had turned into a monster, wept myself to sleep, and went to bed early. The following day, Stephen summoned me back to his office, and he was on the phone at his desk, telling me to strip, which I did, and then he escorted me there. After that, I had a shower and sobbed some more since I cheated once more. I simply couldn't stop myself, and I'm aware that I'm headed towards destruction, but I was unable to discover a way out. Over the course of the following few weeks, I had sex with Steven whenever he requested. I was becoming more at ease having sex with him as I undressed in my living room and entered his office nude. That although I continued to cry later, I felt less guilty and less ill. This continued for weeks until one day I entered his office and saw internal auditor Mike Daniels. According to Steven, he was explaining to Mike how I was supposed to show him how amazing my low jobs were by giving him one. Was disappointed that I consented to have sex with Steven in order to protect myself from something that never materialized. But I never consented to go with anyone else. But when I declined, he urged Mike to go and return in an hour when we were alone ourselves once more. He just went to his TV, put in a DVD, and hit play. The screen displayed the two without shouting or threatening. Of us having sex on the couch a few days prior to my face being clearly visible in his lounge. He claimed to have recorded every interaction between us since the beginning, which demonstrated how much I was enjoying it. If I didn't give Mike a BJ, I would send the tapes to my parents and husband and have them displayed in the staff lounge. I don't recall whether I cried or felt bad when he returned. Steven began sharing me with others when I cheated on Dan, and I was numb at the time. Since then, I've offered service to two additional executive managers, Mr. Smith and Mr. Johnson, and Peter Jenkins, the head of sales, also had sex with. The head of accounting, Robert Adams, leaned over Steven's desk and observed him while he informed me that my responsibilities had altered in the future. I would be accessible to any executive management upon request. Anything they desired, just as he promised me I could leave whenever he pleased. I was also expected to accompany the management team to meetings and appointments without an appointment in order to meet with potential. Since I was now officially an office hooker, I was allowed to do anything my customers wanted with anybody they wanted. That updates everything, and the purpose of this journal is to record the circumstances that resulted in my becoming the. I'll try to document everything I do and who I do it with going forward, Titan Corp hooker, in the hopes that I can escape this disaster one day. I'll be able to use this record to show Dan that I did nothing wrong, and I apologize for what I'm doing to Dan. I know what he would do if he ever found out. He'd probably want a divorce and take Sophie away from me. He might even want to kill Steven. I'd be lucky if that's all he did. Because Dan has a very tight and conservative moral code, and I violated it in 100 ways. I loathe myself for injuring him, but I couldn't help it. I trusted Steven, and he lied to me. I was influenced and failed to recognize my direction. I'm now in a difficult situation and am aware of what I'm. Even if what I'm doing is wrong, I can't help myself because if I stop, I might harm Dan and Sophie. Please assist me and find a way to forgive me. I don't care what happens to me. I just don't want to hurt them. I sat on the bed and closed the diary, not realizing until later that the front of my shirt was wet and still had tears in it. I was so furious that I may have hit anything when I tossed the journal across the room and crashed into our. I got out of bed without giving it any thought after screaming and killing that animal Steven, who choked Karen to death, and headed to the loo because I needed something to calm me down. My banana sandwich violently resurfaced as the only. The fact that bananas tasted the same going down as coming up was my saving grace. After my stomach was empty, I stuck my head in the. I took a shower and turned on the cold water, but it didn't help me feel better or get rid of my pain, at least not the vomiting. Wiped off my face, so I picked up the diary and straightened it up before returning to the bedroom. The photo that I had knocked over, I clutched the picture of Karen in her wedding gown and thought about how lovely she. Normally, her long black hair falls straight down her head, but for the wedding, it was piled up on top of her head. People have always made comparisons to her because she had the cutest smile and dimples, which words couldn't describe. I thought Princess Diana was the most beautiful woman I had ever seen because of her regal nose and wide-eyed gaze. After placing the frame back down and touching her face behind the shattered glass, I sat on the bed and started reading the book. Additionally, Mary from Maple Street Elementary called to say hello, Mr. Adams. We were concerned when you arrived at the workplace more than half an hour ago to pick up Sophie from nursery. Didn't arrive? Is everything okay? I cursed as I glanced down at my watch. I'll be there in 10 minutes, thanks. Silently, yes. I simply lost track of time. I gathered the stack of items we needed for the weekend and grasped the corners of the journal after throwing it on the bed. I lifted the bedspread and hauled everything to the car, looking like a bargain basement Santa. Hey, as promised, I placed it in the trunk, and 10 minutes later, Sophie was seated at Maple Street Elementary School. When she spotted me enter, she was sitting in a chair with her arms crossed and gave me a sideways angry look. But as her expression softened, she rushed to me and gave me the most amazing hug, oblivious to the tear that spilled on her cheek. Back as she took the highways to Mom's place, which typically takes an hour, I wanted to go over everything I had. Sophie was asleep when I drove there, so I carried her after reading and considering my options, up to the spare bedroom, and told my mom that I was going to start on the list of jobs ever since my dad died I've been. The one performing my mom's tiny maintenance things that she couldn't handle by herself. I just wanted to be at work. Into the night, lost in my thoughts, Mom gave me dinner in the backyard where I was cutting limbs out of her maple tree. As I thought about what I read, I felt brokenhearted. I had to labor countless, trying to wipe away the tears. I only read one entry dated 9 months ago, but thought, so if this started far back, then I wondered how far it had gone. What further tragic news concerning my wife would I discover when I read the rest? I wasn't in a hurry to find out that my life was gone if my marriage was over. Well after dark, Mom came out and sat next to me on the picnic table. What's wrong? She asked gently. All do is look at her in the faint light. Year my favorite puppy just died. I was so distraught that I sobbed and collapsed into my mother's arms. I was a complete mess, but she supported me and held me after a while, I sat up, wiped my face, and muttered, "Mom," as I glanced at the ground. Something I recently learned about Karen makes me think that we are no longer able to be together. It's terrible, absolutely awful. I'm not sure what to do at the moment. I want to murder her, yet I love her too much to merely watch things happen, continue as they are. I need to do something, but I'm not sure what it is. I know that I must be a man and take care of my needs to accomplish, but I'm not sure if I have the strength. It's a little messy, isn't it, Mom? My mother has always maintained a composed and, typically, knowledge comes with age, but for some reason, she's always had it while everyone else was running. She was peaceful and serene, even though she was yelling, dreaming, and hollering like a mad person. I've always trusted her since she looked me in the eye and always knew what to say to improve the situation. I had answered, "Dan," which I knew was correct. "I've always thought you were a fine man, perhaps much better than. I think you have the capacity to resolve the issue if you admit that you have one with Karen. I understand that you might have to cut your losses and flee, or you might have to forgive her for whatever it was she done. You can and will act morally. Just keep in mind 2 things first. Sophie is a lovely child who needs her father. Therefore, I constantly advise against doing anything that could hurt her." I stopped to consider what she had said because I knew there was more to it than just the "I've got your back if you need me" part. "Thank you, Mom. I knew I could rely on you to share your thoughts, so this gave me something more to think about this weekend. Little boy, I promised Sophie that I will do all it takes to be a man," and we went hand in hand through the. I went to the living room after she entered the dark backyard and strolled through it to the house. I didn't get much sleep on March 2nd, 2024, so I sat on the edge of the bed watching the sun rise up through the window. I could smell fried apples, which made me think of my mom. I had a difficult night, so I woke up, showered, and went downstairs for breakfast. "I won't ask how you. I want to sleep since I could hear you waking up all night. Just eat breakfast, and you'll sort it out." "Thank you. I promise not to do anything foolish, Mom Grotto, and I'll be back. I just want to be. I think it's acceptable to be by yourself for a time, but watch out. I don't want to have to go back there and bring you home. Sophie and I will have a great day if you just unwind and take care of your obligations after your father's viewing." I had completed all of the small tasks on the list before lunchtime, plus a few more that I had located my mother, and I took Karen's journal and a few beers from the refrigerator after Sophie went grocery shopping and began. When I was younger, I would return to the edge of the grotto to be alone when I was traveling into the woods. It served as a safe haven where I could reflect and make decisions when I was growing up, but I felt like the weight of the world was on me. Sometimes when it came to making decisions, my best buddy and I would sit on the edge for hours discussing our plans for when we grew up. Life seemed better until I looked up into a 150-foot pit. I sat back on a rock and gazed over the edge. Not much had changed since my last visit. I had a long beer after my father's burial and read over the journal's entries following the first. Didn't help me with my dilemma or offer anything new to what I already knew, but she did provide the names of the males. In addition, she wrote about the men she had slept with, what she did with them, and the number of times she had done so. Her descriptions of each of them were generally dry and impersonal, but occasionally, even when she wrote about how amazing something felt or how much fun she'd had, she still sounded regretful. Although the writing appeared to become more comfortable as the post progressed, I thought her actions were somewhat. Amazingly, I discovered a journal entry from July 12, 2023, stating that this past Thursday was incredible. I never imagined I could accomplish what I did, but I did great. Let's start with Monday, which was a week ago. Stev and informed us that we would be driving to a new branch office each day to meet with the salespeople. I had to dress nicely for the meetings on behalf of the staff in order to distribute the fiscal year-end bonuses to the salesmen in the area. We visited the branch office in the Western region on Tuesday, where we spoke with 4 salespeople: Jim Gray, Paul Simmons, John, Melvin McCabe, and Norman Gray, the department sales manager. Stephen expressed his pride in them for being the highest producing branch this year and said he was present to give them their bonuses. In addition to the bonuses, each of them was given the opportunity to spend 2 hours with me in a hotel room. One of the men was eager, but Stephen promised them they could do everything they wanted as they got their bonuses. Stephen handed me a key and instructed me to go to the hotel and wait in order to fulfill his offer. The first man arrived an hour later, and after we had sex, he departed, and the next man showed up. He was a little bashful afterward, so I just talked to him and he went. The third guy then appeared, and I thought I couldn't handle it any longer when he departed. Then the department sales manager arrived, and I suppose that's what being a manager is like. Naturally, I was worn out when Stephen returned to the hotel that night. I had sex with him earlier, and on Wednesday, we drove home and saw Sid Green, the branch manager for the Southern region. And I met with the 4 salespeople: Eric Green, Ian Stone, Leroy Johnson, and Sam Schultz-Steven, and I was. When he returned to the hotel on Thursday, we headed to the Central Region branch office since he was too exhausted to perform for us. Overall, I had a very great week because I was able to do things I had only dreamed about, including having several men at. At the same time, I received $300 in tips, but more importantly, I had fun. I still felt terrible about cheating on Dan afterward, but I changed completely and invested a lot of enthusiasm into everything we did. But after it was all over, I went back to being myself and felt as though I just wanted to die. I'm like 2 distinct people. I despise that person, and I'm the one who follows instructions. I am a devoted mother and wife, and that is who I am. I suppose that's what it's like to be a hooker. Indicates that I laid down the notebook and looked out over the gorge, thinking that this would be the ideal Locati Zero, end to end. No one would discover the body for a very long time, if at all. But why was I considering suicide? Anything bad was done by Stephen Hart and Karen, and I shouldn't have to bear the consequences of their actions. But I was in pain. Karen's writing seemed to be less regretful and more like she was enjoying what she was doing. When she returns on Saturday, I will have to ask her if she preferred it to being with me. Decided that if she doesn't give me the truth or denies anything, I'll face her when she returns. Sophie, and moving in with my mom's divorce is too much for her to handle after what she did to us on Monday. After picking up the notebook and reading about Karen's adventures, I'm going to go beat the living daylights out of Mr. Stephen Hart. She spent New Year's Eve entertaining all of the managers at a manager-only Christmas party, which left her exhausted. According to what she stated, there were more than 20 men and women in the hotel room available to any employee of the company who wanted her. It makes sense why I wasn't invited. She hosted guests in her lounge all year long and even had sex with. After he brought pizzas to a meeting, she gave the chief of police and a few of his colleagues a tip. At a management retreat, she performed with a group of deputies as payment for their services to the company. Numerous strippers, both male and female, that, according to her, will live on in the memory of everyone who witnessed it. I could infer from her writing that she was a very complicated individual, and I could practically read her thoughts whether she wanted to or not. I've read about having 2 personalities, but I've only ever seen the one she presented at home. I'm not sure if I would enjoy the other one. Her most recent diary post was made only a week ago, and she spent this weekend out of town at a company function. Thus, it's probable that she was the focus of attention once more. I am aware that I wanted to end my suffering since I couldn't bear to read about her adventures any longer, so I shut the journal and I leaned over the precipice and threw my eyes closed as the pictures of every act she wrote about whirled around in my mind. I was by myself once more, so I rinsed my mouth with a swallow of beer after finishing the first beer and the little breakfast that was left, and then collapsed in the weeds, sobbing. At the time, I was feeling quite sorry for myself, and I was unaware that how could I have missed anything that was happening? I could now look back and see things that might have made me apprehensive, but I had no cause to question or be suspicious of Karen because I loved her and she always informed me that perhaps she didn't realize what she was doing was problematic, and we never argued. Instead, she always kept. She was always a wonderful mother to Sophie and kept up with her share of domestic chores, but our sex life has somewhat slowed down. I wondered how many times I received sloppy seconds that I never attended, assuming it was a result of us working so hard. Any of her corporate gatherings. Generally, because I'm not much of a party animal, and I was either passed over or not invited. What else did I miss? I also thought that I was partially to blame for this. It's safe to say that Karen's gullibility was constantly used by the guys in her life. When we were married, I promised to. Her father controlled every part of her life, so I didn't want to treat her the same way other guys had. Life prior to attending college, including her attire, her involvement in school-related activities, and her. She was allowed to do whatever she wanted when it came to dating in college, but she ultimately ended up with a guy who was just similar to her. My father was a terrible boyfriend who was extremely domineering and exploited me both sexually and emotionally. Made me do things that were comparable to some of the adventures I wrote about in my journal. He broke my heart by abandoning me. I met Karen just. Her manager had been surreptitiously taking pictures of her in the lavatory after the restaurant's owner sacked her. She was quite trustworthy in his restaurant, and I trusted anything guys said me, especially when they were attempting to approach me. I suppose I wasn't observing the males around me closely enough. I've never felt more stupid than. Someone told me that hindsight is 20/20 at that precise moment, but I, disagreeing, my mother led us to the car on March 3rd, 2024, as we departed. Dan, please give me a call and let me know what's going on. I know you'll find a solution, and I adore Karen just as much as I do. As much as you do, but she has changed and isn't the same if even half of what you told me last night is accurate. You married Karen, and I trust your judgment. Keep in mind that you have Sophie to care about. I arrived home in the afternoon and spent the remainder of the day playing with Sophie in the backyard. By the time I put her to bed, she was completely worn out. I got a few beers for the evening and walked to the living room to wait for my wife to get home at 8 o'clock. The door opened, and Karen entered with her suitcase. "Hello, honey," she began, setting it down. "How was your day? Did our young daughter behave herself over the weekend?" I looked up from my beer and remarked that my weekend was definitely not as enjoyable as yours. I got screwed by only one person. You probably had dozens. She looked at me like I had just sprouted a second head. Was that crack supposed to say I was working all weekend? I'm exhausted and the flight back was horrible. Now I return home to your craziness. What the hell? I reached under like a frisbee. The chair grabbed the diary and threw it across the room, almost hitting her in the head as it flew by. Smashed into the china cabinet. She stood there with her mouth open, staring at me like I had 3 heads. I didn't. She proceeded to the china cabinet and noticed what had ruined the wine glasses and the glass front. She froze at our wedding and did nothing for a long time before ultimately entering the mass of shattered glass, picked up the diary, and then, to my amazement, she quietly left through the back door. She was sitting in the small swing set, holding the notebook to her chest, and crying when I stood up and glanced out the kitchen window. I wasn't in the mood to become involved, so I returned to the living room and began drinking beer number 2. After finishing beer number 2, I began drinking beer number 3. Karen entered through the rear door, sat down across from me, and placed the journal on the coffee table. Her face was red and puffy, and her mascara was all over it, but I wasn't sure if she was crying or not. Her normally neat hair was in disarray. Her lower lip was trembling, and her eyes were flowing down her cheeks. Her hair was in disarray. Her lower lip was trembling, and she was still breathing heavily. Whispered softly while glaring down at the book. Now you know what you're going to do, I added, glaring at her. I haven't made a decision yet, but whatever I do will be significant. You could even say it would be epic. Will you divorce me? She asked. She glanced up, caught my attention, and murmured, I'm almost glad you know I haven't decided yet, as calmly as I had just stated. I never intended to hurt you or us, but I did, and I never planned to dig as deep as I am. I have no justification since I am aware of what I did and who I am, and I never intended to begin. I'm exhausted and just wanted everything to end so I can resume my normal role as a working mother. Of everything, including the lies, sex, and those in charge of my life, I wish to be with Sophie and you, but I'm afraid I ruined that. Dan, please know how terrible I am for what I did. Talk to me. I read your journal from beginning to end, and I have a few questions. This past weekend, she bent her head and said, Yes, I was pretty sure, but I had to ask. I don't want to, in reference to another sex fest for your journal. Understand the specifics, but I would like to know one crucial thing. Did you do it willingly, and did you find it enjoyable? According to what I've read, you seem to be having a great time and are passionate about everything. No, I didn't enjoy it more than we ever did. Is that accurate? Did just differently, Dan. I love you, and I'll be honest. I never intended to hurt you. Although I do like the attention and the sex, it's not the same as how you and I make love to everyone else. In addition to the fact that it's simply sex, I come across as a lying, cheating hooker. I can't dispute that I'm a hooker, a liar, and a cheater. Although I still do it out of necessity, I never relish lying to you. I just said it and I stand by it. I'm not sure what you were hoping to hear, but I don't believe you're lying, and I don't think you could get out of this situation by lying. Anyway, after a lengthy period of silence, I asked if there was any chance we could still remain friends because I couldn't see how there could be. You prioritized your life over your family. I was deceived for months and most likely embarrassed myself in front of them. You left Sophie and me for a long time, saying things like, I don't think we can be us again. The US you're referring to ceased to exist as soon as you knelt before that man. I was simply too foolish to see Karen fall. I'm going to work with you on Monday and beat the living daylights out of him. I'm crying into the cushion on the couch. It appears that he blackmailed you into doing all of this after you cleared out your desk, and he was in charge of getting. You were accountable for remaining in this mess, but I've always thought that everyone involved has to pay in a difficult circumstance. I'm not sure how many men and women you've dated, but each and every one of them is just as guilty as my heart. I want to punish everyone, but for the time being, my heart will have to do it. Let me share a memory with you. Politicians used to refer to what I wanted to achieve during the Cold War as the new nuclear responsive. The retaliation would be swift and deadly if someone did something against the United States. If one atomic bomb were to be used effectively, all of the adversaries and many innocent people would be eliminated. I would use an atom bomb on people's hearts if I had one. I want to make everyone pay for it dearly, and I'll start by taking care of collateral damage since I'm not sure how practical that is. Don't do something foolish on Monday, Dan. He's a strong man with a lot of friends. Like me on Monday, you may find yourself in a situation from which you are unable to escape. Regardless, I will conclude this get out. Get out of my sight, Karen. I don't want you around me. You may sleep in the spare bedroom from now on. I got up and grabbed another one after leaving the room crying and hearing the sound of the spare bedroom door slamming. I might as well go to bed on March 4th, 2024, as I wasn't going to sleep well after a few beers. Monday, Karen sat calmly as we drove to her work. She spent the night weeping. I knew it since every time I got up to go to the bathroom, I heard her ID badge got us into the building, and I walked by the receptionist and into Hart's office after Karen, the guard, left for her office, was grinning while seated behind his desk. I wasn't sure what to make of it, but I was still going to leap over it. Hart's desk. I was about to begin weeping when I was seized by the neck and dragged backwards too. I felt a big weight on my chest on the floor, and as I glanced up, I saw a large man wearing a security guard's uniform. I attempted to resist as I sat there with someone pinning my head to the ground, but I was pinned beneath 500 pounds of muscle, so I gave up. I was looking up when Hart's face appeared. He grinned and said, The guard at the front door was waiting for you and called to say that he saw you enter. The two men who are holding you down are my personal guard and security squad will do anything I ask of them, even breaking your neck and finding your daughter, whom you may name your wife. I have a wonderful thing going on with her, so you can't stop me from doing whatever I want with her. Here, she will serve as my personal hooker, and if you attempt to obstruct her, I will have you killed and thrown in. I'll make sure your little Sophie never sees the first grade if you find the closest skip. Do you get what I mean? I was outnumbered and outgunned, so all I could do was murmur that I still wanted to get up and murder him. My spouse, Mr. Brave, rushed to my aid. Although I couldn't see clearly from the floor, I heard him say, "Karen," and then I heard a door open. "Oh my God, please don't hurt him," Karen said. Hart screamed, "Stop talking and come over here. I want to give your husband a." In a brief demonstration, the two oversized guards grappled with me, tied me, placed me in a chair, and then gagged me. As the two guards stood behind me, one hand on each of my shoulders, I was facing Hart and Karen. "Now, Karen, I want." She stood and gazed at me, saying, "You should show your little hero here what you do for us by stripping and getting down on your knees." Hart held her head up to his face for a long moment before reaching up and grabbing a hold of her silky black hair. I'm not sure what he said when he whispered something in her ear, but she moved forward right away and began unbuttoning. She dropped her blouse on the floor behind her while crying, and he brought her there. I attempted to. I don't know what hit me, but all I can recall is getting out of the chair and killing that pig before the lights went out. I remember waking up in a hospital room after leaving the office. My right arm was in a cast. I hadn't formed my left arm. I could only see with one eye, and my mouth felt like it was full of cotton, and nothing came out when I tried to call out for a nurse or someone. A policeman entered through the open door, and when he approached near enough for me to focus one eye on him, I saw that he was the local police chief. The officer approached me and grinned, asking how I was doing and whether Mr. Adams was in any pain. "I hope all is well with you. We spotted your car in the ditch off of Mill Road. It appears that you swerved to escape a deer. We filed out at the workplace, but you and I are more aware of the fact that my brother-in-law, Stephen Hart, has done a. I want to keep Stephen by my side because I had a nice evening with your wife, which was one of the many enjoyable things for me. Continue having affairs with your wife." So I was overjoyed when he called to inform me that you had fallen down a set of stairs to take care of things for him, but you ran off the road just so I wouldn't have him involved in any way. Recognize that if you disagree with my story, I will have to visit your house and discover some illicit drugs or something that would make your neighbors unhappy. So keep quiet and let my brother-in-law handle things. Does what he pleases and no one is harmed, not even you or your beautiful kid. Karen drove me on Wednesday, March 5th, 2024. I needed assistance getting into bed because I had multiple bruises and scratches, a broken a broken arm, and 2 broken ribs. I wanted to avoid making it her problem, so I wanted all the aid I could get. I hadn't seen her since she was on her. She arrived to drive me home without saying a word, and I didn't inquire as to where she had been for the previous 2 days. Didn't speak to her, and she didn't speak to me either. She simply looked dejected, and I was unable to speak or eat. As I lay there, I heard my mother's voice warning me not to do anything foolish, which I did, and I noticed where it got me in March. Young Sophie served me whenever I asked for a drink, and Karen avoided me while she was at home. Around 5 p.m. on the 8th of 2024, I was able to move to the living room after gaining some independence. The front door opened, and the same 2 guards who had been all over me earlier, Hardart, then came in close behind Karen, displayed a tiny gift bag next to the chair I was occupying. It was a simple get-well gift that I don't want my favorite worker to think that her tiny hubby is being neglected. So here are some DVDs for you to view while. Karen, even though you're unable to do it, I know you'll love seeing them almost as much as we did creating them. He was hovering over me. "Karen, would you please go into the kitchen and grab me a drink? My throat hurts so much." Karen departed, and Hart brought up the phone. "Don't worry, we're just going to talk. Stay in there till I call you." "Done? Do you mind if I call you done?" I'll give her some additional chores to complete outside once we sit down at the coffee table. She is available to work on the weekends and in the evenings if I want her to, and she will comply if I instruct her to work if I ask her to travel for work over the weekend, she will do so. If you cause her any trouble, it will happen again. Keep quiet and go about your life. I get really irritated when people fuss. I remained silent, but I was fuming inside. Simply gave him my utmost hateful gaze in return. We understand each other now, don't we? Is there anything you want to let me know before we leave? That the bandage covering my jaw made it hard for me to speak, but I was able to. But don't worry about the two co-workers who are keeping me from voicing my opinions. They won't take any action this time. Speak up, my kid. Now, let me tell you something. If you do nothing when someone wrongs you, it's not the same as if the victim does not act. Hart and his thugs simply stood there and stared at me as if I were a monster from space, then grinned and remarked, "Ah, the little worm is also a bookworm." In essence, he instructed me to say, in simple terms, I wanted to convey that I will eventually be able to bring you and everyone else if I were you, I would be making you all pay for what you did to Karen and what you caused me. My words, I'm going to take you down and I'm going to take everybody in your care, are always being watched over my shoulder. Little sex business. Down with you. Everyone will pay dearly, and there will be a ton of, mark my words, collateral harm. How are you going to do this? A jerk like you can't even defend his own wife, let alone exact revenge on hundreds of people. Karen returned to the room and sat down. It's all bullshit, but it appears like your spouse wants to be the hero and shield you from terrible guys like me. Course, but I just wanted to let you know that your work hours have increased. We'll discuss the specifics tomorrow, but that's all for now. To put it simply, Dan will be sleeping by himself a lot from now on. Get ready, since you have an appointment at the next time you see my pal Manny at the Hilton on Parkway, let him know I'm not his. I'm out of the loop now, messenger boy. If he wants you to travel anywhere, he'll have to speak with you directly. After giving me a mournful look, Karen left to go upstairs, and 30 minutes later, she was dressed and leaving without saying anything. On March 12th, I sat in the dark in the living room and sobbed as I thought about what I had done. The beer didn't help. On Saturday, 2024, I heard Karen ringing in the kitchen while she was throwing up upstairs. She entered the room after a few minutes in the loo. Dan, I'm really nauseous. I believe I have the common flu since I have a fever, sore throat, and body aches. If I do, I want Sophie and you to avoid getting it. So please stay away. I'll be miserable for a few days, and then it will be done. I can't go out or work like this, so I'll just stay in bed. Please give me some Tylenol and something for my throat. I can't take care of Sophie till it's gone, so I'll go back to bed and get you something. Sophie went upstairs and I brought Sophie to the pharmacy and for ice cream on March 18th, 2024. Karen had already departed when I got up on Friday to drop Sophie off at school and head to work as normal. It was the first time she had left the house since the previous weekend. It is clear that she had recovered from her virus, or else she wouldn't have gone. Perhaps Hart called to tell her that she needed to work because she wasn't making everyone happy at the office. I simply had to continue doing my duties and be the loyal spouse I was in spite of whatever she had. Didn't want to visit the hospital once more or worst. On Tuesday, July 25th, 2024, she gazed. We didn't talk much when I visited her since she was always exhausted. And when she was home, Karen would take Sophie to the park. Whether going shopping or wherever else they could be together, she always returned smiling, and we had a really peaceful celebration. Santa brought Sophie the Barbie doll she desired along with it, so she didn't notice any difference. I said that Ken's Sophie, Barbie's home, and Barbie's Corvette were all in Barbie heaven. Karen offered me something cheap even though I didn't want anything from her, and I didn't give her anything in the afternoon. Sophie and I went to my mother's house for dinner. My mother knew that Karen was no longer welcome there, so she stayed at home. Everything that was going on, and now she wouldn't even speak to Karen. I believe my mother would strangle her if she could. We enjoyed a delicious meal together, and my mother gave Sophie Barbie's best friend Skipper. Now, I am death, the one who destroys. Robert Oppenheimer's World's J. March 10th, 2024, Monday. A knock on my office door interrupted me while I was updating the company website's course catalog at my desk. When I looked up, I noticed a man I had never seen before. He introduced himself as Mr. Adams, Mr. Daniel. Adams asked if I was Dan. I said that I was, and he explained that he was a state police investigator. He wanted to know if my Karen Adams was his wife. When I answered yes, he informed me that she had been murdered, although they were unaware of every aspect. He was able to inform me that you must accompany me to the hospital right away. I tried to stand while I sat there staring at him. I'm sure I looked foolish, but I had no idea what to say or do. I reached for the phone, but was unable to use it, so the detective placed his palm over. Am I on the pointless phone, sir? I'm sorry for your loss, but you must accompany me. May I make a call on your behalf or inform? I informed my boss that I needed to call someone to come get my daughter from school since I couldn't do it by myself. The investigator escorted me out to his car and went to the hospital after I requested a neighbor to bring up Sophie. Mr. Adams, I know this may be difficult to hear, but the way he told me what he knew. Witnesses claimed that your wife's boss killed her while she was seated at her desk by attacking her from behind. He hit her over the head with a big, heavy instrument, and before some of the other staff members removed him, she never recovered consciousness. She passed away en route to the hospital. The building was sealed, but we don't yet know why. Our investigators are looking for information. Do you know anything that could aid our investigation? I just sat quietly. As I watched the buildings go by, I considered how I would explain that when we got to the hospital, I wasn't. I was somewhat shaken when I had to see Karen's body because there were enough witnesses to the incident. I had to complete a number of forms regarding the handling of her remains after obtaining a positive ID from the site. When the police released her body, I saw that I had signed the paperwork with the pen she had given me for Christmas. Finished, I threw the pen in the garbage and sat in the waiting area, watching the detective on TV at General Hospital. Brought me back to the office, where I got my car and headed home. En route, I picked up Sophie, prepared her food, and, after putting her to bed, I sat in the living room and called my mother to tell her about Karen. On March 13th, 2012, I drank a beer, stared at nothing, and felt nothing. I wasn't sure if I could handle it alone, so my mom accompanied me on the day off to set up Karen's cremation. Sophie, who has been taking care of my mom since she moved in on Saturday, stated she would stay till everything returned to normal. I simply intended to leave Karen and let her suffer as much as possible in public. I never intended for her to pass away in that manner, suffering in private, and when I returned home, I would have to live with her passing on my conscience for the rest of my life. For the first time since I learned about it, I went to bed and slept soundly without having any dreams about. On March 15th, 2024, I picked up a few boxes, went upstairs, and, about halfway through the process of packing up Karen's bedroom, I came upon her journal once more and briefly glanced through it to see if there was any indication that I was aware of her or that there was anything requiring us to lead a typical life together. There were only postings about her sex fests, so I took out Detective Archer's card from my pocket and picked up the phone. Archer, and Naturo said hello on the other end. I'm Dan Adams, Detective Archer, and I recently discovered something that could be crucial to the investigation of. I read a portion of Karen's journal, but I'm not sure how to explain her passing. Actually, Mr. Adams, you have to see what I read in order to believe it. I was going to give you a call because I need to chat to you about a few significant developments in the investigation. Hello, Detective Archer. This is Marie Adams. Would it be acceptable if I dropped by your house this afternoon at around 2? Thank you. Coming over. Let's enter the living room. I was a little anxious about the detective's findings because I knew what he was going to say, but it wasn't at all what I had anticipated. Mom gave us each a bottle of water. She placed a platter of homemade oatmeal cookies on the coffee table. No one was able to resist them. Archer began. I should tell you a few things about the investigation, Mr. Adams, some of which you won't like. That Mr. Hart's case saw a significant turn on Monday when a judge set bond at $1 million during his. Mr. Hart's wife posted his bail that night after shooting him 12 times during his arraignment on the murder charges. Dead, and the reason he was killed is related to what I have to tell you next. He hesitated while attempting to. Choose your words carefully, sir. Were you aware that your wife had HIV? When the autopsy report showed positive results, I exclaimed, "Oh my God, no, I had no concept, and since the state health department is now involved there, please don't be offended by my next inquiry, but I must know when you and your daughter were." Before responding, I gave it some thought because I knew my mother was aware of the last time you had sex with your wife. Was going to say, but I had to think about it first. We lived together until March of last year, and it's been a long time since we split up. House, but slept in different bedrooms. We did this primarily for our kids since we didn't want to lose her. No longer feel any love for one another. Instead, We remained together for the sake of our daughter. Since we haven't been intimate for a year, I'm not sure how long we could have continued, but I still believe the health. The department wants to test you to find out why you split up because it's difficult to communicate about, but I'll give it a shot. While organizing her bedroom, I also discovered this journal. I thought she was seeing another man because of these DVDs that depict her in action, and when I confronted her, she acknowledged that she was. At the time, I believed she was lying to protect someone, but I was unaware of how much. I only read a portion of it, but it appears that she was involved and that Mr. Hard was working hard alongside many others. Notebook, but it appears that she had numerous sexual encounters and documented her activities. You are welcome to keep it, but I don't. Archer took the book and opened it to a random page, reading it. She did something terrible that made him want it in the house. He had a wide-eyed expression on his face for a few seconds, and I believe this is going to be very beneficial because the health department will need a copy in order to locate everyone she might have been associated with. We may be dealing with a serious health issue. I'll keep you updated on what's. I'm afraid that the murder case against Mr. Hart is unimportant at this time. I didn't tell you why his wife shot him, but death put an end to one case and began another. When she was detained, she claimed to have contracted HIV from her spouse because she was also infected with the virus. I believe your wife gave it to him, husband, based on a cursory look at her journal, but we don't have the. We have 3 persons we already know about, but we haven't begun to determine the autopsy results yet. If you need any additional information or assistance, please let me know, and I will do all in my power to assist you. There is one. I should also mention that we discovered hundreds of DVDs in Hart's office that featured your wife and other men. With the help of this journal and the films, we might be able to locate everyone and get them examined. I was just staring at him with tears in my eyes. Thank you, Mr. Adams said. You've been really helpful. I'll keep in touch. Then, my mother turned to me and said, Dan, you knew what she was doing last time and weren't totally honest with the officer. And said that there was nothing you could do about it. You ought to have informed him that I already looked like a whining husband. I didn't want the police to believe that I lacked the courage to confront her, Karen, but I did. Hart and his mother, but I was admitted to the hospital because I was worried that anything I said or did would have been extra. Emily. Even worse, I didn't want to risk Sophie getting hurt. Did Karen threaten Sophie? No, Mom, Karen didn't hurt Sophie. Was he saying that if I told him what Karen was doing, he would have made sure Sophie was safe? Hurt a lot. So I remained silent since I didn't want to risk his carrying out his threat. Reviewed some facts with Detective Archer just now. You must have endured a pure ordeal for the past year. Hell, I don't blame you for your hatred of Karen. I'm simply happy that you looked out for Sophie and handled everything else as best you could. You could, Mom. I hated myself for doing it, but I had to do it. However, it's only the beginning. We'll find out on March 20th. Detective Archer gave me a copy of the Health Department's 2024 Thursday report. Preliminary report, it appears that I was rather surprised when he informed me that the case pertaining to Karen's death inquiry was concluded. That hundreds of people could be affected by Karen's HIV infection, according to the Health Department. The local papers refer to it as the heart epidemic, while others are calling it an HIV hotspot. Whatever you name it, there is a significant HIV outbreak, according to early accounts, with Karen and Hart Incorporated right at the center. One Karen engaged in sexual activity with 70 individuals, 25 of whom they knew by name. After testing everyone, they were unable to identify some of the 2 individuals they contacted. 24 of the individuals Karen had intercourse with had HIV. It might take 9 hours because they were still looking for any other partners she might have had after their partners. It took them up to a year to fully assess the scope of the outbreak. They hadn't decided how. Although Karen was infected, Sophie and I were not, according to the official report. Only one of the Hart corporate headquarters shut down the local business and let go of employees after managers at Hart Incorporated tested positive. Employees have been placed on leave while management and newspaper staff look into any illegal activity. Obtained a copy of the Health Department report and used it to inform all of the state's newspapers, which said that the quantity of demands for HIV tests have risen, and doctors' offices were overflowing with demands for the health. Although the department was aware of the 75 names, some people spoke up and spoke to the media. The majority of their comments were absurdity, and they entirely blamed Karen despite the fact that the outbreak was covered by major news outlets. There were threats, so I deactivated my phone because the media was everywhere in town. My mother then took Sophie to school every day since I was denied entry to the facility because they claimed I was a health risk every 2 or. Consequently, a reporter would knock on my door, seeking an exclusive story that I didn't. I still go to work, but I get a lot of people staring at me, so I don't even bother answering the door in them. Ore. Work quietly, then head home. Life is easy. You pass away on Tuesday, April 2nd, 2024. I received a call. Karen's life insurance policy claim had been resolved by my insurance company, so I could visit the local office, and Sophie was the recipient of her $200 check, which I picked up on Monday. I had a lawyer's appointment yesterday in town who wanted me to bring a wrongful death lawsuit against Hart Incorporated because he had a different view of the law and believed I had a solid case. So even though I'm not familiar with the law, I told him to go since I had nothing to lose. He also had an idea regarding bringing legal action against all 75 individuals known to have appeared in Karen's journal. He stated that there was little chance of receiving any money out of them, but at least their names will be publicly available and the health department will keep a careful eye on them. I had access to Karen's journal, which I could use as the foundation for the lawsuits. I said go ahead and guarded the names. I sat back and waited for the fallout because I believed that publicity would be detrimental to everyone. On June 15th, 2024, my lawyer and I met with the Hart Inc. lawyers, and I provided my deposition the previous week, and they went over it and asked several questions, some of which were quite private. I responded to them as best I could. I occasionally end with the words the lawyer suggested. They gave me $200, but my lawyer was taken aback when they offered him $500,000 to settle out of court. He tossed, backing off with a lot of legalese and threatening to leave while their lawyers were speaking. He told me in a whisper that he was aware the first offer could go 3 or 4 times higher, and as he waited for their subsequent offer, they countered, and the lawyers proceeded. After more than an hour of back and forth, I finally agreed to a settlement of $2 million, and my lawyer received a. He told us as we were leaving the building that a large portion of that money will assist us resolve the remaining 75 suits as well. Ought to work out in the end. I assumed he was referring to the suits he mentioned on July 25th, 2024, and I spent the. Mom and I enjoyed some peaceful time during the summer away from the chaos at home, but Sophie liked the sun. I discussed moving with Mom after we decided that she had outgrown Barb and now wanted video games. I believed it would be a good idea for Sophie and I to move somewhere where no one recognized us and start anew in order to avoid the litigation. I just told her to start looking on Friday, August 1st, 2024, in order to bring her along. Marked 2 significant events in my life. First, we resolved the final 75 lawsuits that brought the. In the end, I agreed to pay a little sum of money to settle 50 cases each. Second, for a variety of private reasons, I dropped 15 lawsuits, 3 of which were dismissed in court. 5 were dismissed when the defendant appeared, and were dismissed for technical reasons. 5 of them went to trial because of health issues, and they were determined to have owed me a significant sum of money. Awarded, with a total of about $600 given out. I took another. In addition to receiving $600,000 from my attorney, I also sold my house to a real estate agent at a lower price. Money didn't matter. All I wanted was to go as soon as possible, as quietly as possible, and start over somewhere else. I informed him at the conclusion of the settlement that although he now owned the house, I still had a few things to accomplish tomorrow. Everything in the house, including the mattresses, kitchenware, and furnishings, will be taken out by Goodwill. I'm not. I've already sent ahead everything I want to save. Therefore, I'm not bringing anything with me since I have too many unpleasant memories. Before Goodwill arrives, you are free to take anything you want. The cleaning crew will be here in the morning and afternoon, and I will also have them. The least I can do is clean everything from top to bottom. Someone will also be stopping by to pick up my second automobile. We'll be far away by this time tomorrow, so I sold it too. I can't drive 2 cars at once to get to my new house. By then, if you'd like, I can leave town covertly in the middle of the night, and by morning, we'll be far away. On August 2nd, 2024, I turned around to see how Sophie was doing in the back seat and noticed I looked down at the morning newspaper on the seat next to me, which had a collection of toys, and saw that she was sleeping. Front page story highlighting one of their reporters who was nominated for the Journalism Pulitzer Prize at. A few days ago, a series of publications about the heart crisis showed that at least one person was profiting from this catastrophe. Since the story surfaced, the same newspaper has reported on the happening, stating that one of the 24 cases of HIV infection. 32 more persons have tested positive, according to reports after coming into contact with those individuals who had sex with Karen and subsequently infected his wife and two of his lovers must have. Approximately 60 divorce lawsuits involving individuals included in the third piece of work have been filed. Police reports that they handled more than 50 calls of domestic abuse, including those involving the individuals listed in. The wives of the 75 individuals involved in the litigation have granted 20 restraining orders, according to the state health. The government calculated that the total cost of medical care for all 7 afflicted individuals would exceed $20 million. They dismissed 3 department heads, 10 employees from the heart office, and all 5 top supervisors, including the remaining 15 employees were offered jobs at other branch offices, but none of them ever accepted. Discovered the cause or timing of Karen's infection, 11. One person was killed, 12. Even though one door is closed. Ed, don't you realize that another is open? One individual committed suicide, but we still have a long way to go. Bob Marley, March 15th, 2025, Monday. I can no longer feel anything. Recently, however, I've realized that I smile sometimes at things, generally something Sophie said or did. I believe she is the sole reason I have come this far. I will always love that young girl as long as she is my little girl. I'll get over everything eventually, but not today. While I'm with my hands in my pockets and my eyes fixed on the white front door, I'm standing outside a funeral home. I'm scared to enter since there are my oldest friend's ashes inside. We were born on the same day. We grew up together, played together, laughed together, and shared all of our life lessons. On the same camping trip that he took Sarah Marks and I, we both lost our virginity. Since we were inseparable and attended the same college, I believe I got the better part of the bargain. Donna Barnett began to follow various life courses and develop different hobbies, but we remained in contact over the years. Weren't as close as we were as children. We matured and changed into different men, but now that he's deceased, I'm devastated. I'm unable to enter because I don't want to look foolish in front of everyone, so I just stand on the sidewalk and look at I stared at the door, hoping it would open and engulf me, and when it did, Mrs. Polino was grinning down at me. With the exception of a few occasions, I hadn't seen her in nearly 12 years. She had gained a few pounds and had a gray streak in her hair, but she appeared just as I had remembered. She was stunningly beautiful when I was a teenager. At night, when I lay in bed, I imagined closing my eyes and seeing her long black hair fall over her wide. Her delicate face was framed in ebony by her tan shoulders, and her eyes were captivating, but she possessed the most amazing smile that could brighten a space or solve any childhood issue. I loved that woman, but I knew it was real. Was incorrect because she was the mother of my best friend, who is currently in A. Despite her lovely grin, she is holding the door open at the senior home just past it. I stood there, frozen to the pavement in the hopes that the earth would open up. Her stunning brown eyes caught my attention as I gazed down at my feet. In a broad smile a few inches away, she questioned with her sharp. Even her little voice and the noises she produced were stunning. I'm all right, Mrs. Pellegrino. I'm having some foot pain, but it's not as awful inside as you imagine. I had the same issue when I first arrived. Placed her arms around me and made one last step forward. She was the mother of my best buddy, who had died. I knew she was only trying to soothe me by hugging me, but I couldn't get the warmth out of my head. She radiated. I felt a bit ashamed and aroused. I had dreamed of this long ago and was shocked that after all these years, as I still felt that way for her, I was even more surprised that I could still feel something, anything simply. Knowing that was somewhat soothing, I muttered into her hair at the side of her head, "Thank you, you can't know what he done for me, how much he meant. I'm terribly sorry he's gone. I miss him a lot." We stood together for a while, embracing each other, not saying anything, just by holding me carefully she made me feel Like I could almost step through the door and confront what was inside. Suddenly, she broke our embrace and stood looking into mine. When she asked Dan, her eyes were questioning, and she replied, I wanted to check in with you before we enter because I had a question for you. I would appreciate some candid responses. Do you have any questions? Yesterday, a lawyer arrived at my house, introduced herself, and offered me in. The contents of the envelope discussed a trust fund that was established for Joshua in my son's name. When I asked her who was in charge of the $1 million, she said that no one knew. I believe they know who organized it, but they were unable to answer my inquiry. Did you have anything to do with it? Did you create a trust fund in Manny's name with this? I immediately looked her up, the eye, and answered, No, ma'am, I don't know anything about it. And she stood there telling the greatest lie I've ever told. I knew I couldn't lie to her and get away with it, but I had to try. After a minute of her face staring at me, changed from serious to joyful, and she grinned at me while muttering, Thank you. I kept that a secret since I knew she knew, or in any case, I simply returned her smile. I'm Josh's legal guardian now. You may already be aware of Manny's status. Sick for the past 3 years, so we made arrangements for me to adopt Josh before he passed away. As a result, my grandson is now my son, and I intend to, if there is any money left over, use the trust fund to ensure Josh is accepted into the top universities and schools. As a wedding gift, Josh stated that he wished to become a doctor in order to discover the cause of his father's death. I said, Mrs. Pino Anna, you are old enough to call, with a smile, going to try to find a cure for what killed his dad. As she spoke, Anna gave me a little pat on the side of my face, which made me smile even more, and turned, saying, Anna, I think I can go in now. Would you please escort me? Headed for the door, put her hand under my arm, and we walked arm in arm. As soon as we were inside, a man came up and informed Anna. When they were ready to begin, Anna turned to face me and gave me a cheek kiss. Please stay, she urged, adding, I want to talk more. And I want you to meet Josh. He's a good child, and I think you'll like him a lot, she said, grinning and pointing to the guests. I signed the book and took a seat next to one of the exit doors while the woman next to me silently vanished into the crowd. After a few minutes, Ryan sat down, and a young man brought me a box of Kleenex, which I accepted just in case. Approach the stage, ladies and gentlemen. We appreciate your attendance and are here to honor the life of. We wish to honor Manny's life today, even though we are all aware of his suffering and death from AIDS. Not how he passed away. He was the most amiable and generous man I've ever encountered. He was humble and compassionate. I lost because he was so down to earth that no one recognized him as Manny. Instead, we all knew him as Steve, who would give anything to anyone. I took a bunch of tissues, pressed them to my face, and sobbed. Thank you for watching. What do you suppose inspired you? Please share your thoughts in the comment section below regarding the anonymous donor who established Manny's son's trust fund. Till the next time, don't forget to hit the bell icon, like, and subscribe for more articles like this one.